Fear Not, a sermon delivered by Dr. Rob Blackburn on March 31st, 2013 at Central United Methodist Church in Asheville, North Carolina.
All right, our passage for this morning comes from Matthew 28, verses 1 through 10. Hear now the word of our Lord. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Some years ago, a large suburban church in Atlanta had this Easter tradition, somewhat like ours. Every Sunday, Easter Sunday, 500 lilies, $10 a piece. You could honor or name someone in memory for the lilies. 15 years, 500 lilies. One year they arranged all the lilies, a bank of lilies in the form of a cross. And one year it was more impressionistic, just the flowers were strewn across the whole altar area. 15 years, 500 lilies, and then on the 16th year, the tradition crashed. At the end of a service, a woman who was very new to the church said to herself, "You know, I have a friend in the hospital, and I bought one of the lilies. I'm not sure which one, but I bought one of the lilies. I think I'll go and take a lily to my friend in the hospital." And so she comes forward and she lifts up the lily. A lot of people were still in the congregation as they were leaving, and she turns in a loud voice and says, "They're plastic." Great was the consternation in that church over this. Little huddle groups were formed, ad hoc committees surfaced. One man got out his Popeil pocket calculator and came up with the idea, let's see, 500 lilies, 15 years, $10 a piece, $75,000. And if they're plastic, they're using the same ones every year. It got to the point that they had to call a church conference, have everybody there. And the lay leader got up first to address the situation. He apologized, and he said, "Now, what some of you aren't aware of, that when we started this tradition 15 years ago, we told everybody knew they were going to be plastic." And he mounted this argument, the argument of financial stewardship of resources. He said, because they're plastic, we are able to use the same ones every year, and more funds go to a very good cause. Then the minister stood up and he mounted the theological argument. He said, it's really appropriate that our Easter lilies are plastic because plastic lilies always bloom. And he said, besides, we wouldn't want to waste Easter. The minister was right. We do not want to waste Easter, but he was wrong. Plastic lilies never bloom. If they cannot die, they cannot bloom. I know some of you are curious at this point. we're going to be fully transparent here today. These lilies are plastic for the sake of the musicians. The rest of the lilies, all about the sanctuary and all of the church, they're real lilies. And so they should be, because if they don't die, they can't bloom. We've said this a good bit around here. You've heard me. I've kind of worn it out. I'll say it again. You just cannot have Easter without Good Friday. There's going to be no resurrection if there hasn't been a death. We didn't come here today to tiptoe around that, okay? We didn't do it all during Lent. When we went into those 24 hours, we walked with Jesus there into that olive grove, and we saw him claw at the ground, and he was as frightened as we've ever been. We talked about it last week, that Jesus was made up of nerve and blood and ligament and sinew. He suffered, and he died. Ask the soldiers. Ask any of the soldiers who were there. You mean he's the one in the middle? Yeah, he's dead. We stuck a spear in his side, but even before that, he was dead. Ask Mary. Oh, I know what you're going to ask, she says. I was at a distance, but all the goodness in him, all his life, he drew his last breath. He was dead. Easter, it has to do with the death of Jesus, and it has to do with defeat. It just feels like the ache of a lost campaign, doesn't it? You ever been a part of a losing campaign? Well, the people went to the polls, all for Barabbas. Raise your hand. Oh my goodness, it's Barabbas by a landslide. John, James, go on down to the room where all of our supporters and workers are gathered, and tell them thank you for all the efforts. And maybe we could get the band to strike up a verse of Old Lang Syne, and you could ask a few volunteers to stay afterward to pick up the chairs so we can close up the place without having to rent it for another week. The only proper landscape for Easter is the landscape of defeat and death. Go tell Herod. That's right, go tell Herod. He wins again. Go tell Pilate he can get a good night's sleep because Rome is safe. And go tell Caiaphas he's right. Political expediency carries the day. And here we are this morning. It's Easter morning, but a lot of you, some of you are living somewhere between Friday and Easter. You know about goodness getting mocked, and you know about dreams and hopes and promises getting detoured and delayed and deferred and sometimes defeated. Oh, and someone said, but wait a minute. If Jesus blossomed in the resurrection, can't we say, no more death, no more defeat? No, we can't say that. The Easter Jesus, remember when he walked into the room, he didn't walk in the room and say, look, no scars, no wound in the side. No, Jesus said, see the scars. The Easter Jesus is scarred, and so be it. Because of that, we have something called gospel. Because of that, we have a gospel that'll show up and play very well in a cancer ward. We didn't come here today to tiptoe around the facts of mortality and defeat. We have a gospel that will play in every crook and cranny and crevice of life. But what are we celebrating? And why the lilies and the great choir this morning? Because something did happen. If it dies, it will bloom again. And how can we say that? We can say that because of the testimony of these breathless women that went to the grave. You heard their story again from Matthew. It was Mary and Mary Magdalene. They went so early it was still dark. And why did they go to the cemetery? Some of it was about preparation. It was the respectful thing to do. I think some of it is you've been there. You've lost a loved one and you just can't stay apart anymore. You go to the cemetery for a few moments to feel closer, maybe reach some kind of closure. That's where you go to grieve. And that's where they went. And they got there. And the earth shook. And there was a messenger dressed in white and just sitting on the large rock that had been rolled away. He said, "Fear not, he's not here." And they got to their feet and they went running. They went as the first witnesses to the resurrection to tell the other disciples. Now, we traditionally say that Pentecost is the birthday. That's where the church was birthed. Some people would say the church began right there. Who are we? At our core, we're witnesses to the resurrection. Every Easter sermon I preach, I'm aware that there are some good seekers among us. And they have a wonderful sense of devotion to Jesus, but the proclamation this morning will strain their credulity. I understand that. I mean, 21st century empiricist. I can understand people straining this morning for a little bit more evidence. One piece of evidence that I would say to those that are seeking, look at us. The church, for all of our foibles and faubles and failures, we exist. Our existence hinges really on the resurrection. You know, that's the only thing that was really different before and after that first Easter. Everything else was pretty much the same. Same old sun came up in the east. Same old Herod got out of bed and stretched and scratched himself and asked for his slippers. And same old shopkeepers rolled out their wares on the streets of old Jerusalem. The only thing that really changed was there was a little group gathering. The group I think we can call church, that was finding their voice in the hopeful message of these breathless women. That wasn't their story. That wasn't the story of this little group 24 hours before. They were just a little huddled, hiding out community. I can just hear them. Last one in, shut the door. Bartholomew, for goodness sake, shut the door and throw the latch and bring down the Venetian blinds. Somebody's going to look in the window and recognize us. They were a little frightened covey of quail. But then you turn over into the book of Acts. It's just a few weeks later, and these same people are out there on the streets of Jerusalem, and they're raising their voice about the risen Christ, and even in jail cells, they're singing it for all they're worth. C.H. Dodd, the theologian, said, resurrection isn't a little bit of wishful thinking. It's not a little belief that grew out of the church. It's the epicenter of experience around which the church grew up. These first witnesses went and told their story, and others believed, and they told their story, and others believed, and on, all the way down in this great chain of belief to us. And this morning, we haven't just heard, but now we have our own testimony of what we have experienced. It was just about 10 days ago, and I went with a couple of our church members who had been leading a disciple Bible study out at Buncombe Correctional Facility. We were there with 10 inmates who had been going through a 35-week study together, and this is what I heard from 3 or 4 of them. They noted that iron bars don't make a prison, at least not in their experience of Christ. Right there in their incarceration, they said that he had shown up and he had shouted some of them out of their tombs. You see, you're looking for some evidence. That's maybe the best evidence that I could offer. His presence among his followers. Jesus died. He showed up to them. He shows up to us. The women, after they heard the good news, they're running back to their friends. Then they had their own experience, didn't they? It was along the path. There was Jesus. Very interesting to me. He says the same thing to them the messenger said. He said, don't be afraid. I'm afraid of what? Well, my goodness, it'd been quite a morning. The earth shook. God appearing in strange places, calling out names in a cemetery. But I think the be not afraid speaks to that larger fear that gets in the way of faith. It wasn't so many weeks ago that right here in this place we began the gospel a messenger coming to a little peasant woman named Mary and say, "Don't be afraid." And then these ragtag rural shepherds out there on the field, the messenger saying, "Don't be afraid." Afraid of what? Well, the real enemy of faith has always been fear. Why didn't you try out for the team? Well, I was afraid I wouldn't get chosen, afraid I would fail. And why didn't you tell the truth to your parents? I was afraid I'd get punished. And why do you hang on to your wallet and your purse with such a tight grip? Because I was afraid of insecurity, afraid. And Easter comes along and says, don't be afraid to live and care and serve and love. Don't be afraid to freely and joyfully throw yourselves into God's purposes. Don't be afraid. I am here, I am now, I am always. And this morning, I hope you hear the great Easter message speaking back to that fear of death, giving us power to talk back to that. Not just death of the body, but all the forms that death takes in our world. Dead ends and dead ways and dead habits and dead relationships. I imagine some of you during Lent have been filled enough with the grace of God that you took a journey into those gangrenous, maybe dying parts of yourself. Maybe along that way you heard old death step up, a pasty-faced death, and that kind of sneering voice saying, "Who do you think you are? What do you think you're doing? You can't change anything about your lives. Go on and write fixed, settled, concluded across the pages of those days. Go on and learn to live with the dark cloud." No, Easter comes along and says, there is no failure of life or love that God cannot redeem. Then that Easter faith helps us talk back to that larger, more cosmic fear about our world and its future. I know you get troubled as I do. You watch CNN, you read the newspaper, and the principalities and power of hatred and treachery and fear seem so large, and goodness gets mocked, and truth is on the scaffold, and wrong seems to be on the throne. But Easter rises out of the ashes with a yes, but kind of message. Yes, all those things are true, but truth and love never die, not with God, not with us. When we were in Shelby serving the Methodist church there was a softball field connected to the church, and they had a beautiful stand of white pine trees, kind of ringing the field. Center field, left field, right field, and they were old white pines, been there a long time, and it just was kind of part of the landscape, the cultural landscape of that church. Well, one season, it was the spring of the year, and it had been particularly hard on the white pines. A thunderstorm had come along and taken a couple down, and then there was lightning. There was lightning. Two trees in 1 week were completely destroyed by lightning. And, well, it was kind of a reflective moment for that church and a sad moment. We had this administrative board meeting. It had already been called, and a member of the church who was particularly mournful of the loss of those trees got up and said, we've got to do something. We can't let this keep happening. Well, the chair of the board, I think with his tongue in his cheek, said, "Well, the chair this evening will be glad to entertain a motion to see that the lightning is stopped." If you were paying attention during Lent when we walked through those 24 hours, that's what happened. All the principalities and powers that got tied in with hatred and treachery, they got together, didn't they? The Sanhedrin and Caiaphas, Herod, Pilate, people like you and me, church leaders, the crowd. And they said he's all too lovely, too lovely. There's too much light in him. So they said, let us extinguish the light. And when they snuffed the light and life that was in him, they said, let's make sure it's over and done once and for all. Throw his body into a tomb and roll a big a rock as you can find over the face of it, and double the guard. See that he and his truth never get loose again. But the earth shook, and the rock was rolled away, and the world got its first glance at a new world. A world where the Jesus way of truth and compassion and love and justice and wholeness and peace have the final word. Final word. If it dies, it blooms, but if it blooms, it will die. Oh, but it will bloom again. And how do I know that? Because Jesus was standing there and is still in our midst saying, "Fear not." Tony Campolo, in one of his books, talks about his years of being a member in West Philadelphia of an African-American church. Now, Tony Campolo is as Caucasian as I am, but he and his family just found great joy in being part of this predominantly African-American church. And he noted what I have noted in worshiping with our brothers and sisters and more of that tradition, that a preacher gets a whole lot more feedback in an African-American congregation than I get from you. I'm not criticizing you, but I have to really kind of just, it's very subtle. I mean, sometimes I can look, I can say, oh, she's awake, he's awake, there's a gleam in the eye. We're doing good here, we're connecting. And then sometimes you see the furtive glancing at the watch, and you say, uh-oh, man, we're going south here. We've got to work at this. You know, it used to be that the Methodist church that I grew up in still had an amen corner. I think one year the Methodists gave it up for Lent, and we never found it again. So the African-American church, there's almost a dialogical kind of relationship, the preacher and the congregation. And if the preacher is lagging a little bit in energy, zest, and zeal, you'll hear one of the deacons say, "Now, help him, Jesus. Come on, help him, Jesus." And then if the congregation begins to sense, we're going somewhere now, we got some momentum, you'll hear something like, well, that's it now, keep it preaching now, take it on home, all right? And Campolo said on this particular Sunday, it was Easter Sunday, and he said that the masterful preacher of that church, he said, he took this one phrase and he just kept working it over and over, and the phrase was this: it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. He began soft, began slow. He said, it's Friday, my dear Jesus is dead. Mary, his mother, is weeping. His disciples are just scattered and running about like sheep without a shepherd. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And, they began to figure out where he was going with this, you see. And there was the waving of some hands, and there was some, well, keep going, keep going, keep going. And he kept going. And he started turning it up a notch. He said, it's Friday. Wow, that's pretty good. And you think I paid them? No. They were just at the first service. I mean, So... Now the preacher and the congregation, they're getting together and they're moving on down the track, and he's getting it going now. He said it's Friday, and Pilate thought he's washed his hands of a whole lot of trouble, and the Sanhedrin, they're just strutting about town and laughing and saying, there was a lot of life in him, but we put it out once and for all. It's Friday. Now let's try our own version. Word came to Asheville. You know what it was Friday when word came to Asheville? Some of us were right here in this room. Word came to Asheville that Jesus was dead. All that goodness and compassion that was in him was gone. and our hearts were heavy as lead. It's Friday. Yeah. Oh, and the cynics among us, they say, come on, what's wrong with you? Haven't you been watching CNN? Haven't you read the newspaper? Don't you know the good die young? We live in a flat, drab, one-dimensional world. You can't change anything or anyone anytime. But you know what we ought to say to the cynic? The headline may say, it's Friday. And you know what? There are some people that came here today and they are bent over by the reality of defeat and death in their life here and now. Hopes deferred and dreams delayed and detoured. And they are bent over under the burden of that. May we be such witnesses of the resurrection, so winsome to its truth, that they see in our very lives, even on days when it looks like Friday, it's Friday. It's Friday. It's Friday.